Welcome everyone to this podcast. I have a very talented individual named Nabhan Sazzad. He's from Apple and he lives in Austin. So Nabhan, can you just introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. So my name is Nabhan, in Arabic Nabhan, in Bengali we say Navan, whatever you want to say. I don't really care too much. But yeah, I'm a software engineer at Apple, and I've been working there for about kind of a year or so. I'm more so on a software engineer on like a backend team, work a little bit with ML. And then other than that, like I went to college in California, at UCSD, where I got my degree in computer science, and then I'm also working on my master's part time right now.
Awesome. So just wanted to ask a couple of questions. I had a form of a list of questions. I just wanted to ask, general knowledge style. Some questions that, a lot of aspirants would ask. So one of the things is, what inspired you to pursue computer science and become a software engineer?
So I guess it's kind of rooting from like the fact that like growing up, my dad was a mechanical engineer. He is a mechanical engineer,
Hmm.
and growing up, kind of was inspired a little bit by that. I always kind of was fascinated by technology in school and like elementary school and middle school. I was always good at math and stuff.
Hmm.
So I kind of knew that generally speaking, I'd probably go down the engineering route just because of the basis of the existing math. Uh, I was pretty bad at most other subjects other than science and math.
Yeah.
Um, so because I don't know, I want to pick something I was good at and interested in. So
Okay.
then, like, I also grew up playing baseball. I know, kind of irrelevant, but trust me, there's relevance.
Okay.
I grew up playing baseball, and when I got to high school, I didn't make the team. So I needed to fill in a class for that slot that was originally designated for baseball, right?
Nice.
And I saw we had a computer science class. I had been hearing stuff about it. I didn't really know much. All I knew that it was like somewhat related to engineering and it involved computers. So I was like, all right, I'll do that class, right?
Nice.
And then I ended up doing well. Took a couple more computer science classes in high school, including like APCS. Again, I did really well in those. I enjoyed it. So for those reasons, I decided to pursue computer science, and then in college, again, continued like success and enjoyment. Now here I am. So
Awesome, awesome.
yeah.
I mean, you have a similar background like me. Like, I was interested in video games. When I was small, I had a Nintendo Wii, and a GameCube.
Hmm.
So I used to, every game that I used to play, I used to try to end it, try to use, all the hidden levels and everything like that. My dad gave me a compact computer. I remember it was a Windows XP. Um,
Hmm.
and I used to always check whatever was new on it, every single feature. I remember we used to surf the internet back in the day when it was 2007, I guess, 2010. YouTube was new, and so everything about technology I loved, and it
Hmm.
was great to see that there's actually a career related to technology. So that's one of the things that excited me as well. Um, when you did your first, let's say, get into coding, right? What was your early experiences like? I have these questions by other people, like, in the beginning, it's always difficult. I say to myself, like, and I say to a lot of others, like, suppose you get into cooking, right? And the first day, you'll basically suck at cooking, right? You'll make a really bad dish. If you, let's suppose, ride a bicycle for the first time, you're gonna ultimately make a mistake and fall. So, what was your first early experiences like coding?
Good question. I'm gonna skip that first class that I took my freshman year of high school, because honestly, that class was a little bit of a mess, and there were things or ways that they taught you about code that I didn't really like.
Right.
Like we started off with block code. I'm not a huge fan of block code personally.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll talk about my experience with like APCS. For those that don't know, APCS is like technically a college level like class
Okay.
for computer science, and it's typically equivalent to your like first two computer science classes that you take in college, or maybe one, depends if you're on semester or quarter system, right?
Mm.
But I guess the platform we learned how to code on, it kind of walked you through like the idea of code first, right? Like for me, this platform, like we had I forgot what, I think it was a dog called Carol or something, right?
Oh, okay.
And they had these pre-built functions in it. And you would just call your functions. It's super simple. It was like move forward, move right, move left.
Right, right.
And that kind of taught you like the fundamental logic. And I didn't realize at the time, but I was also learning how to call a function at the same time, right?
Okay.
But then when you talk about like actual code, my first language was Java.
Nice.
The thing is that when you're starting to learn how to code, you kind of just jump into the basics like what is a variable, what is a string, or what is an object versus a primitive, stuff like that, right?
Correct.
But you don't really understand some of the nuances that might exist. Like in Java, for example, I always saw public static void string, and then like you have or sorry, public static void main with string bracket bracket
Yes. Command line
whatever. Right?
arguments. Yeah.
I was so confused for the longest of time, like what in the world that was, and nobody would ever cover it because like you can't really understand something like that until you understand arrays, or you
Correct.
can't understand user. You have to understand user input or something like that, right?
Yes.
So it's kind of like I understand it's difficult to teach code because you have like a starting point you have to choose. But then there's going to be something that you see that you don't fully get and you just do because you're told to just do
Yes.
it, right? Or like in Java particularly, why do I say public? What is a static? And then there's a concept of like statics in Java versus like everywhere else. Like in C, what is a static, right? It's
Correct.
a whole like mess,
Yes, yes.
right?
I totally understand, and I know a lot of people who are going to be watching this who are in Java and who are studying it and who have been studying it, have that kind of experience. I feel like your advice would be to just follow what the professor or whatever the assignment has, and whenever you have a question, you'll kind of like solve it later down the road, right? Suppose you make your first Hello
Well,
World project, and then later on when you create a tic-tac-toe or something like that, you'll
yeah.
kindly understand what was the purpose of static that time.
Well, now with AI tools, I feel like it'd be cool if I haven't had to do it myself because honestly, these chatbots were released after I learned how to code. But like, you could probably try asking like, "Hey, this is my current level of knowledge. I see this all the time. What does this mean? Or am I not ready? Or will I learn this like after I learn a couple other things?" Right? If
Mm,
you ask like those chatbots for some sort of guidance, and ideally, I mean, if you have a teacher, ask your teacher or TA. Whatever,
awesome.
right? But I mean, if you don't have those options, if you're learning at home by yourself, then you leverage chatbots or leverage people you might know, right?
Um,
That could help too.
Amazing advice. That's something very valuable. Yeah, experience with chatbots, AI, and also ask teachers. That's great. Um, your path to Apple and big tech. Explain that, like how your college experience and your study. How did you prepare for those technical interviews at Apple? And any specific strategies or resources that you use to basically successfully land a job there?
I think that before we get to that question, we have to discuss how do you get the interview in the first place,
Right.
right? And I am someone that says that honestly, there is there's stuff that you can control about trying to get your internship or trying to get an interview. I mean, meaning you have to have completed like some projects or ideally have some sort of research experience, internship experience, or whatever, right? But the thing is, I also want to say that that doesn't guarantee anything at the end of the day, right?
Right.
Nowadays, there's so many people in the field.
Hmm.
Like I'm being honest, there's a lot of people in the field, and that partially there is a factor of luck. In some cases, there's so many applicants, you might not get your application seen. There might be cases where you and someone else are equally qualified, and they have to make a tough decision. They only have time or like resources for like one person, right?
Right.
So there are a lot of factors of luck that are considered. But like to like get these internships, you have to make sure that you do prepare yourself, right?
Hmm.
So I'll kind of explain my journey. I had like 5 internships in college, right?
Right.
So as a college student, my second year of college at UCSD, we have this program called ERSP, which stands for Early Research Scholars Program. It's available at a couple universities,
Hmm.
like I think 7,
Okay.
but it started at UCSD. And the concept is it helps introduce students to research. So at this time, I thought that I wanted to go into research. Um, so I got into the program because I was like, okay, this would be good exposure to get into it. It's a good introductory system. And it's a pretty selective program, but I got in. And I did research with computer graphics. From there is where I kind of started to like working with graphics and vision a lot. For those that don't really know what that is kind of like how your computer interacts with images or visualization.
Cool.
That is the most basic explanation I can give for vision and graphics. But I did research in that, and I ended up really liking it. And then I was looking for an internship. So I'm currently in my second year of college, and I'm looking for an internship.
Was that in
Right?
C language? Just to add in.
The research I did was in Python because there was a shift, right? Most of original systems were written in C, but there was a shift to go more towards Python, mainly because it's just easier to write. To be honest,
Okay.
computationally it's more expensive, of course. Like a lot of the frameworks they use in computer graphics and vision are actually based in C. For example, OpenCV is written in C,
Right.
but there are libraries that help you call C from Python, right?
Understood.
So like.
You
So
got your
I
first
started-
internship, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, my first internship. I got really lucky. It was a startup company called Science Systems. And they had this career fair, and it was like through my school. And I'm saying I'm lucky because I don't think there were many applicants that were there.
Okay.
And it kind of lined up with my skill set. They were looking for someone with interest in computer vision that knew C++. That was me. And
Nice.
so I did that internship during the school year, about 20 hours a week. While I was in school for about 6 months. Then I started my second internship, which was at General Atomics, which was a QA role. And I interviewed for that around earlier in the year. I kind of forgot when, but all I know is that whatever resume I submitted for General Atomics, it did not include my previous internship. So that means that to get Science Systems in General Atomics, my resume only contains some projects I did, which honestly were mainly class projects, as well as my research I was doing. So that's what I was on the resume, and I got 2 internships from those, right? So General Atomics is software QA. I did well enough in the internship to get a part-time offer for the school year, meaning continue my internship during the school year. However, I delayed it by a couple months to do an internship with Amazon.
Right.
When I did Amazon, I had when I applied to Amazon, I was in the midst of doing Science Systems, and then I already had the General Atomics offer, so both of those were on my resume, right? So I get to Amazon, and this is a back-end development role. It was using basically Java and AWS to do some back-end stuff for Alexa, right? Not the voice. Alexa is a giant team that has a million different things. So
Wow.
so I was just on one of those teams, right? And I did that internship during the fall, and this is when the layoffs started to happen. This is fall of 2022. So layoffs start to happen.
I imagine that was the lockdown phase, correct?
No, lockdown was 2 years before.
Okay.
So this is 2022 fall, and layoffs started to happen. Luckily, while I was there, my team didn't get impacted. I have no idea what happened to any of them afterwards. But that internship ends, and so because like things are weird economic wise at the time, I didn't immediately get a return offer. So, but shortly after that, I got an offer with Apple for my next internship.
Right.
So your question was like, how do you prepare for these interviews? I was trying to give you a chain of like what my internships I had were, right?
Yeah, that really helps. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was giving you a little bit of context. There's more context I can give, but I've been rambling long enough about that.
Right.
So let's talk about like those interviews.
Yeah.
Generally speaking, everybody asks you some sort of technical questions, right? Some companies, they ask you just general things like, what is general knowledge, right? Like, do you understand what the concept of a pointer is? How does memory allocation work? Stuff like that.
Right.
Some companies, actually, I would probably guess most companies, based off all the interviews that I've done, it's pretty consistent. You see some sort of leak code style question.
Okay.
And for those that don't know, that's basically like a problem given and you have to solve it with code. That's essentially what it is, right? I think, to my understanding, that's the industry standard now. Everybody asks that at the internship level. And then there's some sort of behavioral interview. And what I actually learned recently is that actually, like, I happen to be someone that's done so many behavioral interviews that I've pretty much learned the strategy for them.
Okay.
But a lot of people focus a lot on the leak code part, but they also need to know that they have to know how to communicate their thoughts, right? Because when you're coding a solution, it's not just about getting the right solution. Actually, for some of the internships I got, I'm not talking about the ones I did. Like I have more offers than the one I mentioned, right? There
Right.
were cases where I didn't 100% get the solution, but because I was communicating properly and clearly, like a small nudge pushed me the right direction, right? And what I say by that is like explain your thought process. Like when you get a problem, take a couple minutes, outline what you're going to do. So your interview knows what you're going to do, and like you know what you're going to do too. You don't get any surprises. You kind of catch most of your surprises, right? You get into coding the problem, and then like you just mentioned what you're doing. And if it's like something small that you forget, right? Like let's say that you are doing your interview in C and you normally code in Java, right?
Hmm.
There might be some like syntactical difference that you forgot, and you're like, wait, I'm forgetting this like little syntax thing. But they know understand that you know the logic because that's the most important part,
Right.
right? And my point is that if you're able to communicate clearly, that's really important. As well as during behavioral interviews, if you can communicate who you are, that's super important. If you can communicate like your background or your thoughts, that's also super important, and that will be also very important when you get the job too. Like that has a very big significance. I feel like many people don't talk enough about.
Oh, awesome. I mean, that's a great way to point out through. I feel like yeah, if you can communicate what your thought process or your strategy is to solve a particular problem, the interviewer will guide you. If there's any hiccups, the interviewer will understand that you know it, but you're basically stuck on that certain point, which I guess every developer has, limitations. We're not like computers, right? So,
Yeah.
so I mean, that's a really great way to explain that point, and that's a really nice advice. What was the toughest part of the hiring process? And basically, how did you overcome that during that Apple, hiring process?
Honestly, you're just waiting to hear a response, right? You don't know what's gonna happen. It just is on your nerves
Yeah,
because you can do as much as you want to prepare, right?
yeah,
It's just when you're waiting to get a response, you're just nervous because you're like, did I mess up? Or even if you make a small mistake, like I think I made a small mistake during my interview, and
correct.
it was like, man, did that cost me or not?
Right,
It's stressful, right? Like you don't know,
understood.
but yeah, it's just a waiting process for me.
Right, and normally, how long is that waiting process like? Is it a couple of weeks, couple of months? For those who are new, fresh grads, in your opinion, is it better to just apply everywhere? Don't wait for just one certain company? How should they go forward?
I mean, you should keep applying until you get an offer, right? Like even if you're interviewing somewhere, you don't have the job yet. You should still apply. Once you get the job, then you can like let off the gas. In fact, you should, because technically speaking, they tell you don't interview anywhere else
Right,
at that point once you get the offer.
right.
But like sorry, what was the first part of your question again?
Like, what was the toughest part of overcoming the hiring process? Like, how long how did you overcome that?
Oh,
Yeah.
I mean, you just wait and see, right? Like you applied, you did the interview. It's just a matter of waiting, right? And like just having trust. Like if you're someone that has like some sort of faith, then have faith in that, like faith that you have. If you're someone that like doesn't have a religion or something you follow, then like just wait it out. Like that's the only thing I can say. There's nothing really much else I can say about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think having a strong portfolio, like, projects, open source contribution, etc., is important as leak code grinding?
I mean, they're both important in different ways, right? The portfolio building helps you get the interview. The leak code helps you do the interview. They're two different components, right? So
Hmm.
you have to make sure you do both of them in such a way that like you don't fall off one way or the other. And the other good thing about projects is just like it's just good for you to do, right? It's good experience for you.
Correct.
Um, and like I don't know, if you do the right project, you can also turn that into something if you know how to leverage it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of those, early, juniors who really want to bring an MVP to life. There are projects, during my phase when we were in our final years of university. So we had a live coding project, which is called a final year project. So me and my team, we developed a Django-based application, which was using machine learning with Django to detect eye diseases, right, through naked eyes.
Hmm.
So if you give a picture of a eye, it would tell you if it's a cataract, a glaucoma, or all those other type of diseases. It was kind of a final year project, and that was for successfully graduating. Um,
Hmm.
just wanted to mention that I was from PUCIT, so it's a
Hmm.
university back in Lahore.
Yeah, yeah.
what advice would you give to students who don't go to top universities but still want to land a job at Apple or similar companies like Google, Microsoft, or anything like that?
Well, I mean, I've met plenty of people that didn't go to like one of the name brands. Like, I honestly think that sometimes going to like those top universities isn't exactly worth it, in my opinion.
Okay,
Like, there are definitely, don't get me wrong, there are for sure benefits.
definitely.
Like, like your network is a very big benefit that you get from there.
Hmm.
And you do get a little bit more clout technically. Like from what I hear, at least I don't know. I don't know what company specifically. But I've heard of some companies like having target schools, or they might like have some locality that they're nearby, so they advertise at that university, right?
Particular like a reserved seat section for those Stanford grads or those MIT grads. Is it like that?
I don't know about reserve seat. I'm talking about like an advertising perspective. Like for
Understood.
example, if you go to a university in the Bay Area, you're more likely to see companies from the Bay Area advertising themselves to you than if you were to be in like some random state elsewhere, right?
Hmm.
That doesn't
Right.
have tech. And that's just purely proximity thing, right?
Understood.
That's what I think it is. At least I'm not 100% sure, right? But in terms of like being able to get the job, it's still very doable. If you're a candidate that knows what you're doing and like you can show that you know how to create something that can be used by users and that can like be that considers a lot of things like fault tolerance, security, stuff like that,
Hmm.
then you should be able to like kind of last or not last. You should be able to get into one of these companies.
Right.
Um, and also at the same time, I don't think it should be your goal to get into necessarily like a thing or something.
Hmm.
Like if you can get into it, great, right?
Yeah.
But it's not the end of the world if you don't. At the
Hmm.
same time, there are plenty of great companies. I mean, look at Nvidia, right? It wasn't always the top company in the
Right.
world, but now I would argue it's up with Fang, right?
It's a dream company. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome. Um, one more question on that is like, suppose people, some have bachelor's degrees and others who do not have bachelor's degree and self-taught. Is it equally, like they equally have an opportunity to grab a job at these companies, or are there differences? And also, just one more thing, does CGPA matter? There's a very interesting question. You need to have 3.5 plus. So those students who really do not like overwhelm themselves with, GPA and they're, understanding everything, is that important for them as well?
So, to your question about I'll do the
Bachelor's versus
GPA one.
non-bachelor's, yeah.
Yeah, let's do the bachelor's versus non-bachelor's first then.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know, to be honest. I think it is helpful to have a degree, um, but I could be wrong about that. I just don't have enough data to answer that question fairly.
Cool.
It's just that most people I've met, and I'm not just talking about like within where I work now. I'm talking about like most people I meet just like outside. They typically have a degree of some sort, from my experience.
Nice.
It also does help competitive wise. I think just it's just another thing to have on the resume because a lot of companies do require it. But in terms, if you were to ask me in terms of like, do you need a degree to be successful? No, because your degree and GPA as well actually, they only really like have any effect during your first job. Once you get a job, and you can show that you've had that job for a few years, or you're performing, or you can describe like what you were able to contribute and stuff, you should be able to be fine after that, right? Then your schooling doesn't really matter too much. Again, that goes back to the name brand thing.
Right.
Like for example, if you're someone that goes to some university I've never heard of versus Stanford, and
Yeah.
you both ended up at Apple, like at the end of the day, you both ended up at Apple, right?
Exactly.
Like,
If you're from Alabama, sorry if there's anyone from Alabama, but if you're in
yeah,
Apple, it doesn't matter. That was just a pushing start, right? For
yeah,
everyone, it's just a pushing start.
yeah. And then for the GPA portion,
Hmm.
um, I guess it sort of could matter. I mean, if you have like a 1.0 GPA, that's probably a problem. But
Yeah.
but like if you have like if you're doing well in your classes, you're probably fine. Like in my case, for example, my GPA definitely went down a little bit because I was doing continuous internships from January 2022 to like I don't know, September 2023, right? I
Wow.
was constantly in internships and I was doing classes at the same time most of the time, right?
Definitely.
And um like when you're in classes most of the time,
Right.
right? And while you're working, you're gonna something's gonna go down, right? Like I'm focusing on work, so my studying is going down. So my grades slipped a little bit, not too much. I think I averaged. I don't remember what I got, but I don't remember getting below a B, right?
Exactly.
And like the thing is that if I maybe didn't do those internships, maybe I would have had a better GPA. But I think the fact that I was able to get that experience spoke a lot louder than the GPA itself, right?
Hmm.
So my opinion about GPA is I don't think it's the most important thing. If you have good experience and projects to make up for it, um, but I mean, if you have a good GPA, it doesn't hurt to advertise it. Though I've heard of like some CEOs being like, "Oh, you know, I don't hire 3.7 or higher." I saw this on LinkedIn the other day.
Wow.
And I was like, okay. And the guy was like, yeah, typically they're not like thinkers; they're just doers or whatever.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. People have different opinions about it. Don't have too strong of an opinion. I just think that like, don't beat yourself up if your GPA is like a 3.3 versus a 3.7. It's not the end of the world.
Really well way to put it up. That's great, greatly explained. Coming back to your job at Apple, what does a typical workday at Apple look like? And do you work remotely, hybrid, or fully in office? How does that impact your job?
That depends, to be honest, on your team and stuff. Like, some teams have more. Like, this is not just Apple. Like, this is any company you work for.
Hmm.
You're gonna have. You're gonna have. What do you call it? Your time that you're developing stuff as an engineer, right? You
Okay.
need time for yourself to code, right? But then you're also gonna have meetings where you discuss like, what impact you're gonna have, what needs to be done, what are customer expectations, et cetera, stuff like that, right?
Hmm.
So you're gonna have a balance of meetings and development time,
Hmm.
and depending on your level of experience, you might have more meetings with people who want to hear more from you. Depending on your role, if you're working more with customers, you're obviously gonna be talking more to customers or talking about the customers that you have to like provide for, stuff like that, right? So it very much depends on your team that you're on. So it's not like a one thing fits all. Just know it's going to be a mix of development with meetings, and also like you have to obviously test your own code
Right.
to an extent. Depending where you work, you will have a QA team to help you test your code.
Hmm.
If your solution is something that's like being actively used by users, then you might have a case where you have to have some sort of like SRE or DevOps people that, or maybe you are the SRE or DevOps. Like for example, Amazon's notorious for having a what do you call it? Non DevOps cycle. It's like a on-call cycle. A lot of companies do an on-call cycle. It's not just Amazon, by the way. A lot of
Okay.
companies do them, and like basically, it's like you take turns of contributing to fixing customer problems. Like when customers flag an issue occurs, you have to go in and fix it, right?
Um,
That depends, right? Some companies they don't actually require that, right?
mhm.
Or that you do that. They might have a team dedicated to that. It depends where you work and what team
Definitely.
you work for.
Wherever you're working, there's a different atmosphere, there's a different set of rules and instructions you got to follow, and there's a different ecosystem, right? Where there's people doing something, maybe in another company are doing it a different way, right? So it's just like the way you have to adopt from one company to the other.
Yeah, and also just like generally speaking, by the way, like when we're going over these questions, I want to avoid talking specifically about Apple.
Right.
One, because like my opinions are my own. Two, because it's not a one size fits all solution, right? Every company is different,
Right.
but they are generalities that do exist everywhere. So I
Cool.
kind of want to focus on the generalities because I think that applies to more people.
Absolutely. So, what technologies? This is a very popular question. And languages or frameworks do you use like most of the time in your own, in your work as well as in your preferences?
Well, I've personally done a lot of work with Python and Java and C++. Those are the three languages that I've used a lot throughout my career, and that's just because like those are my skill sets. This just happen to be the roles I get. But that can vary depending on what role you do. If you're someone that's more interested in web development, then you should focus on something like JavaScript or TypeScript or something,
Cool.
right? If you're someone that's more focused on ML, then your life is basically Python. I mean, like now there's other stuff you can
Right.
use too.
You breathe in
I,
Python.
yeah, I mean, I personally, I do a lot of Python, but that's just because like I've done a lot of computer vision stuff in the past, right?
Right.
So that kind of contributed to that. But then you also might need to know other languages too. Like I don't only code in Python personally,
Right.
but like it depends, right?
Cool.
What you're trying to do. If you're someone that is trying to make you mentioned you used Django before, right? So
Mm-hmm.
you're using a server-side application,
Right.
so you can hear user responses and stuff, right?
Right.
That's important. That in itself is a framework that's unique to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you're someone that's more focused on, what's the example? Cybersecurity. I actually don't know what cybersecurity people use. I think they use whatever language is needed for
Understand.
whatever they're
Yeah, it
working
could
on.
be. Yeah.
Yeah, but like it really does depend on what you're trying to build, right?
Exactly.
So like, there's not a one size thing. You have to look at the actual industry that you're in, right? I
Understand.
can speak towards like ML because that's Python. Andrew's easy. Python and
Amazing.
C++ are big. There's new players out there. I think Goling's being used more. I'm actually not sure.
Mm-hmm.
Could be wrong about that. I heard of like Lura or whatever it's called, Luna, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't used that either, but I've heard of these newer languages. But
Amazing.
just honestly, if you are trying to learn a language, just stick to one of the big ones. Just the important thing isn't to learn a language; it's important to understand the theory. If you understand how the logic works, that's the most important part, right? Because then you learn the syntax of any language like that, right? For example, I don't know what's the language I don't know. I don't know how to code in.
Let's
Give me a
suppose,
language.
yeah, assembly.
I actually don't know assembly.
Okay. Let's say something like what's it called? Um,
Let's say .NET. .NET's a good one.
.NET. Okay.
Right? I've never coded in .NET. I do not know how to code in .NET. However, I understand the logic behind code. I could probably figure it out in a couple of days. I might not know the nuances of the language, but I know enough to be able to get something out within like pretty fast.
And that's same what I can share as well. There was a time where it was extremely difficult when I learned my first ever programming language. And by the way, I learned C language as my first language.
That's
And
not a
what
good one to learn first. That's hard.
I know. I mean, my professors they had that course, and I had no other option. So what happened is that after months of writing, understanding concepts, forgetting about syntax, I got a little bit good at it. And I remember I recalling myself, man, how will I learn Python or how will I learn JavaScript? It took me so many months to just learn C. And your point came across is that once you do master the theory, going to another language is just very easy, a chill in the breeze. Um, the first language you will learn will take time, but other than that, after you move forward, everything else will become like similar. There will be patterns will you'll see,
Mhm.
and you won't have to cram anything.
I will say that I will make an exception. I do not think Python is a good language to learn first.
Okay.
And that is because it is something called an interpreted language. Um, and the fact, so actually, the interpreted language isn't the main issue. The main issue is that Python syntax hides a lot of time complexity and space complexity.
Yep. You're right.
And if you don't understand time complexity or space complexity, you're not going to realize that your Python code is running a lot slower, like than you think it would. Like for example, someone might say, "Oh yeah, this code is for sure O event," and then they have a nested for loop somewhere in like a one-liner. And
Yeah.
you have to be careful. Like just
Right.
because a code takes one line does not mean that it's O of one complexity, right?
Amazing, amazing. And I think that's the reason why a lot of universities have adopted languages like C++ or Java as the introductory to computer science.
I disagree. Actually,
Okay,
I
definitely.
think
Yeah.
I think that's a legacy concept
Right.
because I'm now seeing more universities start to do Python. Because if I look at my own university I went to, right,
Right.
when I was a freshman, the language that they taught first was Java,
Right.
and then I think the next year they started implementing Python as the first language,
Okay.
and I was like, I don't know about that.
Yeah, I mean, it does help, having let's suppose when you're driving a car, if you learn manual driving, right, with the
Yeah,
stick, you can easily drive automatic. And that's how I
yeah.
started driving, honestly. I
I
started
don't
with
know how to drive manual. I want to learn, but at the same time, I'm like, it seems harder than I need it to be. I live in a country where automatic is the default. Like, I should be fine, you know?
Yes, exactly. And I feel like that's kind of like the same way where I think of different languages and Python. When I say like if you're learning Java, it's kind of like you're driving manual. And when you move on to Python, which is automatic, it wouldn't be easy, and you was like, oh man, you don't have to do semicolons every single statement, and you don't
Yeah.
have to, you don't have to remember which data type specified for, whatever variable, because it's dynamically typed, right, instead of
Mhm.
statically typed.
Yeah, I also say like although C is a very difficult language because um, you don't get to learn you don't get to use like a garbage collector or you don't get managed memory or something, right?
Right.
Um, it forces you to learn more than like you initially would want to. It's like it's a tough language to learn first. But the
Exactly.
thing is, if you learn C first, you actually will have an easier time with everything else because you understand how memory works, you understand how pointers work, you understand how garbage collection works, all that, and that's super important. If you understand like your heap and stack
Right.
and stuff like that, you also it helps you a lot.
Do you consider C as the godfather of all languages?
No, I actually don't know what I consider as the godfather of all languages, but I don't think it would be C. I mean,
Okay.
if anything, assembly is probably the godfather of all languages.
Yeah, I definitely agree on that. So that's amazing, man. That's just amazing. Um, what common mistakes do you see aspiring engineers making? Just in your opinion, right? These days, what's happening?
Are you talking about like college students?
College students, young hirees who are in the job.
What mistakes do they make? Like before they get the job, right? You're talking about like preparing.
Yeah, general. What do you see right now these days? Maybe on the internet, why they're not getting to the job role? Why are they, missing out the interview?
I think we've kind of covered most of them, to be honest. But like, I guess we can summarize them here. Like one, not understanding that it's not just about knowing technically how to do something. It's
Hmm.
also good to know how to communicate.
Right.
That's something that's super important, right?
Hmm.
And I feel like it is a joke that computer science majors don't know how to communicate. That exists,
Yeah.
and to an extent, like it is true in the sense that you need to know how to communicate. That's important, right?
Hmm.
Um, Focusing like too much on one thing over another. Like I know people that focus too much about GPA. I'm like, okay,
Hmm.
like a point one difference will not make a difference in your life, right?
Right. Right.
I know of people that focus too much on projects. I'm like, okay, I get it. Focus on projects, but like, don't let your GPA slip too much at the same time, right?
Exactly.
Like, don't be failing your classes, right?
Right. It's a mix of both things, man.
Yeah, I guess that what that sums down to is make sure that you're able to balance everything, right?
Hmm.
That like don't make sure you're doing everything well and to the best of your ability. That's generally the best advice I can give. Like do everything you can to the best of your ability and genuinely try your best. Like try not to get lazy. But then a lot of the other things are like just stuff that to be honest is a little bit more of an epidemic outside of tech. Like
Hmm.
social media to be honest is a very big distraction. Like I doom scroll too, it happens.
Yep.
But it does affect your productivity and stuff, right? At the
Exactly.
same time, I'm not saying don't like enjoy like some of your like downtime or something, but like don't let it take advantage of you. That's what I'm trying to say.
Definitely. Don't let the media control you, right? Be the
Yeah,
one that controls the media.
yeah.
So, one other question is, how do you recommend handling rejection when applying to big tech companies? If someone has already graduated and is struggling to break into tech, I know it's big, it's difficult. I've been there. I mean, I graduated.
I mean, I was there too.
It was 1 year period where I was getting rejected constantly. I recall I was like 200 to 300 rejection emails. I know it was common, and I just got so used to it. Every day when I was taking breakfast, looking at rejection emails all the time. So what should
Yeah,
they
I mean,
do ultimately? It's common, right?
it, so before my advice would have been a little bit different, but given the current conditions right now, I would say that one, it might not be your fault. It's just that there's so many people applying to jobs, especially at the entry level, that it is difficult. So like don't automatically assume it's a problem with you. Like
Mm,
it just might not. It just might be unfortunate circumstances at the end of the day, right?
exactly.
So like don't be too hard on yourself. But then the other thing is like I've always this is the advice I would have given as my only advice beforehand.
Okay.
But this is also good to know. Like if it is something that arises from a mistake of yours, like if you knew that you messed up during the interview or something,
Right.
um, like don't take it as a negative thing because every time that you don't succeed at something it's an opportunity to learn. That's something that's super important, right? Like for me, I like my first year of college I had one internship interview.
Yeah.
That's my first ever interview I ever did in my life. I don't know what the hell I was doing. It was really bad.
Okay.
But I definitely like did not perform well during that interview, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I also had a good interview in the sense that he gave me a little bit of feedback at the end,
All right.
and I was able to learn from that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So don't look at these rejections like if you get auto rejected again, that's something you can't control, right?
Right.
Well, it might be because your resume wasn't good enough, but it also very well could be because something you don't control, right? But if you did the interview and you look back on it, you're like, I killed that interview. Maybe look, just confirm, like, even if you killed it, technically also double check if you killed it behaviorally as well,
Okay.
right? But let's say you killed the interview, like
Yeah.
through and through, then like it's probably just unfortunate circumstances. But kind of like how I said, look at the behavioral aspect, look at any aspect of that you might have not done well, and see where you can learn from there, and that will make you better overall. You know, maybe you will end up with a better job than whatever job you were interviewing for in the first place. You never know. Maybe you end up in a team that produces a product that's more interesting to you. Maybe you get a better like team, as in like the people on your team.
Mm-hmm.
You never know, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that's really well to put everything what you said about, learn it as I mean, take it as a learning opportunity. Whatever that rejection was, you might have some kind of thought, maybe I did something wrong in that, final code round. Maybe I, made the program too slow or something. And just take it as a learning opportunity. And for the next interviews, you'll basically, be more prepared. And but
Yeah.
with the more interviews you do, I think the more stronger you'll get. Um, that's
Yeah,
really well.
but I will say that I definitely do understand that for some people, they've just been interviewing for so long that like they're like getting tired of it and stuff. And I definitely do feel for you if you're in that case.
Hmm.
But like, uh, I actually, I don't know. I'm probably not the best person for that piece of advice
Right.
because like it's a tough situation, right? Like you
Exactly.
have to know how to balance it and stuff, or like try to see if there's something different you can do. Maybe try something different.
Maybe there's one actually advice that I wanted to put in. So one very a friend of mine who works at Netflix. His name is Musa, and what he said to me, which resonated a lot, was that Harris, your resume is like your showcase, what you do. So every time you get rejected, every month please change the resume to something new. So you have a Google Drive, and you would have resumes. What he said, he has, let's say, 50s or even hundreds of copies of his resume, and in every single month he used to update it. So it's a February, he would have a February 2025 resume. When it's March, there would be another version of it, make a copy, and just update and improve it so that it would be a March 2025 resume. And that would be your general resume. That is one that you can just normally show to everyone. But then when you want to especially submit it to a particular company, let's suppose Microsoft, then you would, you'd kind of like cater it, use a little bit of AI, use a little bit of keywords, what they're using in the job requirements, and then apply and see if that worked. If you went to the second round, you can basically put in a spreadsheet and say, this resume, this version got me to the second round, and so I can do something better later on. So, I
I've
mean,
heard a lot of people do that. It works for them, so it's definitely a good option to consider.
yeah.
Um, I mean, that depends. How mass applying are you? Like, that does take a few extra minutes. But I
Exactly.
mean, if it's you're something different to try it. Like it does not hurt at all.
Exactly. Finally, I mean, this has been a fantastic podcast. Where can people follow you or reach out if we want to learn more from you? Just
Um, I guess you can just add me on LinkedIn for now. I'm also working on a couple of my own podcast channels. They're just not set up yet at all,
awesome, awesome.
but I'll advertise those later. Yeah, there were some logistical delays with those, but yeah, you can just add me on LinkedIn. It's just my
Awesome.
name.
Follow Nabhan Sazzad if you have any questions. I mean, this was a fantastic podcast, and I really appreciate your time. And looking forward to meeting you again, hopefully in another event or something.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
Take care of yourself. Have a great
Thanks.
day, man.
All right, bye.
Bye.